Time now for Back Pages Tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us tonight, Ian Ladyman from The Mail and The Sun's Charlie Wyatt. Welcome along to you both. Let's quickly run through those back pages. Extensive coverage of Ricky Hatton's funeral in The Telegraph. Their headline, a family's grief, a city in tears. The Eye features an image from an emotional day in Manchester too, as the city said goodbye to one of their greats. Hatton's funeral dominates much of the front pages too, proving just how loved he was across the country. Let's have a look at the Express. They carry the headline, Mind the Old Boys. That's after Michael Owen hit back at pundits who criticised Ruben Amorim for Manchester United's formation. Another newspaper report on Owen's comments with You're Taking the Michael. That story also features in The Star, plus Thomas Tuchel on how he believes his England side are now on their way to playing like a Premier League club side. The Times report on Anthony Taylor's interview with the BBC, where he revealed his family no longer go to games due to the abuse received. And The Guardian carry quotes from the England vice-captain Harry Brook, who thinks any injury to the Australia captain Pat Cummins could be a boost for the tourists down under this winter. But there was really only one place to start, and that is with the funeral of Ricky Hatton, a hugely emotional day in Manchester this afternoon. Ian, you are a Manchester lad. I know that you weren't back in the city in time for this, but he was such a man of the people in the city.
That's exactly it. I mean, Ricky was an everyman. We've had a few sad losses in Manchester recently. I was just thinking about this earlier, Dennis Law and Colin Bell and Sir Bobby Charlton not so long ago. The thing about Ricky, I think, that makes him slightly different is that he was so accessible to everybody. People in Manchester, lots of people in Manchester have Ricky Hatton stories. Lots of my mates have Ricky Hatton stories of seeing Ricky out and about in Manchester, of watching his fights, of talking to him. He was a man of the people in so many ways, which is why this has touched people in Manchester. People who, probably have only ever watched a handful of boxing fights in their lives, and they would all have been Ricky Hatton fights. I remember watching Ricky Hatton fights in pubs near where I live, and I know people who live where I live in South Manchester who went into town, as we say, into the city today to pay their respects to Ricky. A very, very sad day for the family and for the city.
Charlie, it's not just on the back pages, it's on the front pages as well, demonstrating just how much this man did cut through as a whole in the country, not just in Manchester.
Absolutely. He was, one of those sportsmen that, it was an A-lister. Back page, front page, and as Ian said, people who didn't know him could relate to him. Top sportsmen all admired him, and what a great person he was, both in terms of what he did, his sporting craft, and away from sport as well. And he was, as Ian said, he was accessible. I mean, it was only in August, it was the PFA Awards in Manchester, and he attended, and I had a couple of sort of younger colleagues who have not been with the paper for too long, and they were sort of doing red carpet duties, and they were trying to stop some footballers and sportsmen, and he had no problems in stopping for them, and not everyone did, and he was happy to give them 4 or 5 minutes, and they were absolutely delighted that someone was as personable and spoke as openly about obviously his great love away from boxing, which was Manchester City. And he was one of those guys. I'm sure if you asked not every just Manchester City fan, but lots of football fans and boxing fans, but particularly Manchester City supporters, who they really would like to have had a pint with, Ricky Hatton would have been one of the top names. I'm absolutely sure of that.
And we haven't even talked about his boxing prowess, Ian. He was some boxer as well.
Oh, he was. Oh, I mean, he was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I don't know that much about boxing. I'm not going to talk to you about boxing in detail, but I do know the thrill of watching a Ricky Hatton fight, the excitement of watching a Ricky Hatton fight. Incredibly powerful fighter, incredibly brave, as they all are, of course, but Ricky exceptionally so. And I think that one of the things also that made Ricky so relatable was that there was a vulnerability about Ricky as well. There was a vulnerability about him, not as an athlete. There was no vulnerability about him as an athlete, but there was as a person. And I think people related to that as well, because people looked at Ricky Hatton and didn't see, an invincible man of iron staring back at them. They saw a phenomenal athlete, but who also carried some troubles of his own as well, like most of us do.
Les, talking of those troubles, obviously Mental Health Awareness Day today. On the back of The Sun, Charlie, your paper, a piece by Rob Maul, Jude Bellingham has been talking about mental health struggles and how it does help people in general if people in the spotlight, if elite athletes can speak about it.
Yeah, credit to Jude Bellingham, a really good interview he's done there. And it just, he's stressing, obviously it affects everyone. And he's spoken about, the stigma. Of course, there shouldn't be a stigma in mental health. And I think we have come a long way in the last sort of 2 or 3 decades. And I think, equally everyone appreciates now that even top sportsmen, it doesn't matter who they are. Everyone can have their own battles. And Jude's been really honest today about that, and saying that he receives help, and he's also talking about how everyone has a responsibility to be nice to each other, because Jude, like many other sports and many other high-profile people, but of course this affects everyone, has been, in terms of being on the receiving end of some really nasty, horrible, unnecessary stuff on social media. And that's something no one should have to deal with, and of course most people do, really, who are on social media. And Jude is talking about that, and credit to him for that interview that he's done.
Absolutely. It is International Week, of course. Boys, let's look at the back page of the Star. Now, we're going to come to the big story here about Ruben Amorim in the second half of the programme. But I just wanted to point out the sidebar. Tuchel's Premier Promise. This is a John Cross story, Ian, about Thomas Tuchel thinks it's a good thing if England play like a Premier League club side. Is that a good thing for an international side?
It certainly looks a good thing last night. This is a theme that Thomas Tuchel struck pretty much exactly a year ago. I think it's a year next week since Thomas gave his introductory press conference at Wembley when he was unveiled as England manager. He didn't begin until the January, but he did a press conference in October. Charlie was there, I was there, and he talked about it then. He said he wanted his England team to play like a Premier League side. A few people were a bit sniffy about it, because we like to think that we've dragged ourselves out of the dark ages of kind of long balls and flick-ons and second balls and crosses and set pieces and long throws. But Tuchel's approach to it was, well, look at the way that these guys play in the Premier League. The majority of them play in the Premier League. Look at the way they play. Look at the way they play for teams who are successful. Look at what has taken them to the fringes of my squad and into my squad. And his view was, why would I mess with that? Why would I not try and mine that? Why would I be embarrassed of that? Why would I try and turn the national team away from something that they are good at and that they are used to? There's actually a lot of logic in that. And I was struck last night at Wembley and actually wrote a piece about it. Yes, it was only Wales, and Wales also didn't play well. It wasn't even a very good version of Wales. But despite that, to me, I watched them play last night, and England played like a Premier League team. They played ball, they turned the opposition around, they played balls into channels, they scored a goal from a corner, they scored another goal from a cross, they created chances, they did play long passes occasionally, they mixed it up. And it was put to Thomas afterwards in the interview area that maybe he was getting his wish, and he concurred. He is getting his wish, and yeah, there will have to be nuances, because there'll be so many different types of opponents that England face in America in the World Cup next summer. We'll have to play lots of different ways. But I think Tuchel has had the courage of conviction, of his own convictions, in lots of ways in the last week. Charlie and I and others have criticised him for some of the things he's done. The Bellingham thing, for example, we could talk about that all day. But one thing you can't criticise Tuchel for is not being his own person, not understanding what he wants, and not having the courage to implement it. And I think he's done that. And when you've got a couple of good back-to-back victories to reflect on, then you're quite within your rights to say, yeah, I'm doing it my way and it's working.
Charlie, let's bring you in because you've got a story on the back page of The Sun today that Thomas Tuchel is hit by dwindling numbers of players that he can actually choose from, English players in the Premier League, to play in this club side of his.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of, Ian and myself spoke to Thomas Tuchel last night after his post-match press conference. Sort of the newspaper journalists get an extra few minutes with him, and sort of those comments are reflected in the papers. Gareth Southgate often used to speak about his frustration that he'd go to matches and there just wouldn't be enough English players, and that percentage of players starting Premier League matches who are eligible to play for England under Southgate was often around 30 to 33%, which is obviously really low. This season, it's got much worse, and it's down to below 25%, less than a quarter. Now, Tuchel's sort of take on it was, of course, it's not ideal, and he'd like that to improve. But equally, his argument was, well, it's up to the players, and the quality will get through there in the end. But equally, overall, I think it's quite a worrying trend that there's less English players than ever now. We've got all these academies producing really good players. Of course, the caveat is that there are more players than ever playing abroad. So obviously that figure would be slightly higher if the Conor Gallaghers and the Bellinghams and the Kanes were all back in this country. But I do think it is a bit sad that there are so few English players starting games in the Premier League every week.
Of course, what Thomas Tuchel thinks is really sad is the crowd at Wembley, Ian. What did you make of the way he made that? Well, it became the headline, and the 3-0 win was almost lost.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Thomas regrets saying it because, as we know, he said it to TV as soon as the game was over. And by the time he got to us guys and a little kind of extra bit that Charlie referenced a second ago, he rode back on it a little bit and started saying that he didn't really want to make a big deal of it. He probably realised that he was about to cause a bit of a problem for the FA. But what I will say is I absolutely agree with him, and I and others have been banging the drum for a long time about taking England games on the road around the country. For a while, there was a compelling argument for all the England games we played at Wembley, and that was because the Wembley was still being paid off. The FA was still paying for it. They're not paying for it anymore. Okay, so they don't need to keep ringing those tills and turning the pound signs every time England have a game. And Charlie and I go to every England home game, and we both know that when they play at places like St James's Park and Villa Park and Old Trafford, places have been recently, the atmosphere is 5 times better, simply because they're being watched by supporters who don't get to watch them all the time. You get the feeling at Wembley it's the same people turning up all the time. And if England aren't 3-0 up after 10 minutes like they were last night, the paper aeroplanes start. Every single time the paper airplanes start coming down from the top tiers. There were even paper airplanes last night when they were 3-0 up. It is a problem for England, and I don't really think there is a compelling reason anymore for them not to mix it up a little bit. Obviously, big games, big qualifiers, playing at Wembley, 80,000 people. Other games, let's take it up and down the country a little bit.
Thanks very much, Ian. Let's take a quick break then, and when we come back, we'll have a look at some more of the stories in the morning papers, including this in the Star. Back 3 sneers. Pundits blaming Amorim tactics are embarrassing, blasts Michael Owen. Welcome back. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and welcome back to Ian Ladyman from the Mail and the Sun's Charlie Wyatt. Now, I want to go now, lads, to a story that's in the Express, the Star and the Mirror. If we look at the back page of the Express, this is a story that Michael Owen says people who think Manchester United's problems are down to Ruben Amorim's back 3 formation are embarrassing. Charlie, let's start with you. What are you making of this story?
I think pundits having a go at pundits for all having an opinion, we could go around in circles here, couldn't we? Look, I sort of agree with Michael Owen in that, all the problems at Manchester United, and of course there do seem to be a lot of them, they're not all down to the fact that they play with a back 3. I mean, not helping themselves, and Amorim hasn't helped himself at all. But equally, apart from the fact that everyone is allowed an opinion, which I think is obviously important, and we don't obviously agree with all of them. But yeah, look, I think every Manchester United fan, while they are getting really frustrated and angry with the situation and the performances and the results, and their manager's stubbornness over these tactics, I don't think that's the only reason why Manchester United are in an absolute state at the moment.
Ian, it's your beat up in Manchester. Ruben Amorim talked about these sort of criticism getting in the players' heads. Is it not his job to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I am of the school of thought that if you tell players that something's in their heads, then it will be in their heads. It's like if you tell players that they're playing too many games, they might get tired. They'll get tired. So I don't know what benefit there was in Ruben saying that a couple of weeks ago, that he thought the opinions of pundits were getting the players' heads. Look, Manchester United, despite the fact that they've been struggling for as long as we can remember, is a football club that's packed full of seasoned international footballers, many of them with a lot of experience. So if people such as, for example, off the top of my head, Harry Maguire and Bruno Fernandes and Luke Shaw are going to get worried about what pundits say about the system that the manager plays, and they probably shouldn't be at Manchester United in the first place. Whenever I come on this programme, we all seem to talk about Manchester United. It probably tells us a lot about Manchester United and how they are stuck in this kind of cycle of self-harm. There are many reasons for it. They've made some very bad decisions at the top. They've appointed the wrong managers and they've got some very average players. It's not a great combination. So if you want to pick apart what's wrong with Manchester United, you can dive into any of those. You can dive into any of those things. Is Ruben Amorim's system a part of it? Well, he is the manager. And he's been there almost a year now, and as much as we kind of like him as a bloke, it's hard to say he's done a particularly good job. You could argue he's quite fortunate to still be in the job. You can certainly say he's fortunate to be promised another 3 years, like it was by Jim Ratcliffe a couple of days ago. And the fact is that formations, tactics, team selection is part of his job. And he's making himself look a little bit inflexible at the moment. So I think there's some validity in the criticism of the system. It's not the main problem, but it's part of it.
Of course, the other thing it's telling us is that Manchester United stories on the back page sell newspapers. But the Times aren't going for that. So let's move on to the back page of the Times now. And this is an interview that referee Anthony Taylor has done with the BBC, which has been picked up in the Times by Jonathan Norcroft, Charlie. His family no longer go to his games because of the abuse that he's receiving. Have we got to a point now where this is just becoming untenable, this abuse that referees are getting?
Really good interview today, of course, as part of World Mental Health Day. And Anthony Taylor is talking about, the abuse that he's received, his family's received, referees in general. And he's not just talking about Premier League referees or EFL refs. I mean, he's been a ref for 17 years now at the top, but he's talking about the win at all cost mentality. But he's seeing it right down to young referees, teenage referees getting abused by parents and coaches, and of course most recently in terms of mentioning about his family not coming anymore. They were with him in Budapest when he received horrific abuse from Roma supporters at the airport after the Europa League final, and that was basically down to Jose Mourinho. And look, we all in our industry, we all love Jose Mourinho at his press conferences, and he's great value. But as we know, he does, I say sometimes, often overstep the mark, particularly with officials. And this was shameful from Mourinho targeting the manager in the car park, and then the issues that we saw that were videoed happened to Taylor, in front of his wife and family, which was obviously unacceptable. And yet, I think all of us do accept the fact that referees and the focus on them now is just far too much. And I, despite all the stick they get, I really do admire all referees at all levels. And sometimes I do wonder why they do it.
Well, I mean, I think this is the wider problem, isn't it, Ian? I mean, are we going to be facing a crisis of refereeing in the near future? Because who in their right minds, would become one.
Well, we already are facing a crisis of refereeing. If you speak to people who are in charge of putting referees on parks pitches every Saturday and Sunday morning, then they will tell you that crisis is already here, because they don't have enough, because people of very young age are hanging up their whistle, as I say, don't need it, don't want it. And I have to say, abuse of referees is a curse of our game. It's a stain on our game. I've been saying this for a long time. It's one of the great things in football that we should be ashamed of. And I don't mind saying that it starts with the managers and the players. The way that managers and footballers behave towards referees is so far over the line, it's embarrassing. It doesn't happen in other sports. People say it does, but it doesn't. It doesn't happen in other sports. It's not allowed to happen in other sports the way it's allowed to happen in football. It's part of the culture, and it's wrong. And what happens is that the managers and the players in the Premier League and through the pyramid behave like that, and everybody else in football, all the way down to the parks pitches and the schools pitches, think, oh, it's okay for me to behave like that as well. So you get the parents and you get the players on a Sunday morning and the Saturday morning doing exactly the same. Now, everybody has to be accountable for their own actions. It's easy just to blame everything on the big names, but I tell you what, they don't help. They set exactly the wrong example, and we are where we are because of it.
Well said, well said. We've just got a few minutes left, so I want to switch sports now to cricket. The back page of The Guardian has a story about the Australia captain, Pat Cummins, ahead of the Ashes series this winter, struggling with a back injury, which could, well, basically see him missing the first test, certainly, although there is slight concern that it could rule him out of the series at the moment. Slight concern for Australia, not for Harry Brook, Ian.
No, I mean, look, I'm lucky enough to have been to Australia to watch England win an Ashes Test match in Adelaide back in 2010, I think it was. I know how big that series is. I know how it feels, and I also remember watching an England team that had a fabulous opening pairing, a fabulous top order. That's what I worry about ahead of the Ashes this winter. If Australia's best bowler and captain misses the first couple of Test matches, then that is absolutely going to help us. Don't think it's going to win as a series. I think the form of people like Zach Crawley and Ben Duckett and others, Joe Root, etc., will need to be almost flawless if we're going to win this series. And I also think that Ben Stokes is going to have to be fit as well. So I think we were all heartened this week in a slightly evil way when we saw that one of the Aussies' best bowlers might not be available. But I think there'd be more to this series than just the fitness of one player.
Yes, and there's also at the back page of The Times an interview with Zach Crawley. It's key that he has a good series, isn't it?
I mean, absolutely. If we don't score runs at the top of the order, then we won't come home with the Ashes. It's as simple as that, I would say. And we know we've all been slightly thrilled, or extremely thrilled by Bazball and the way that England have played cricket under Brendan McCullum, and we like their approach to it. I've wondered for a while whether it will work in Australia. I've thought about that for a while. The series with India over here in the summer was absolutely superb, but I think they exposed a few of our slight weaknesses. Every cricket team has one, and I do fret a little bit about whether some of those little cracks in our armour will be widened.
I'm fretting a little bit about us running out of time, Ian. Sorry to cut you off.
Sorry, Claire.
But thank you very much for your contributions this evening, guys. And if you missed any of the show, there's another chance to see Back Pages tonight at hour. And the show is also available as a podcast. Download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.